I'll just request everybody to settle down, please. Yeah, thanks. It feels quite powerful to just say a word and everybody keeps quiet. Right? So, after Dr. Goval has taken basic, now this is a bit about advanced. Advanced, the reason why we are discussing this is predominantly just to discuss what are the new equipment in the market and what is the strengths of each device, what are the shortcomings, and just a basic understanding of how it works. So, as we all understand that there is a shift in the paradigm from a totally invasive device like a pulmonary artery catheter with its associated complications and risks, and with the current understanding that the pulmonary artery catheter is probably, the risk benefit ratio is not really worth in every patient, we are moving more and more towards a non-invasive or a minimally invasive kind of monitoring. So when we talk about minimally invasive, we can have different philosophies behind the monitor. We can have pulse contour analysis, the Doppler, the applied fixed principle, or a bioimpedance or a bioreactance. So these are the basic principles in which most of these monitors work. But at the same time, we can also have a modification of your old equipment, like the MiG-21, the MiG-21 Bison. So that is a modification apparently. So similarly, this is the PAC is the MiG-21, which crashes left, right, center, and the Bison is probably the modification of this old device. And we have minimally invasive devices, which we have already spoken about the theories. So how do we modify an old device? Well, we can revamp the device, add more channels, make it more fast response to cardiac output catheters. If we have a real time, not exactly a real time, within every 30 seconds, a renewal of the data from a pulmonary artery catheter, it almost works equivalent to a monitor which can be giving you real time data at the bedside. So this, how it does it is that instead of a cold fluid which is being pushed in through a pulmonary artery catheter, the lumen for injected, instead you have an intermittently heating thermal filament. So instead of cold, there is a filament which keeps heating, and this filament is present in the RA. So it heats up the blood around it. The blood reaches to the tip where the temperature change is sensed, and that's how it gives a relatively real-time kind of data update regarding the cardiac output. The examples of this is OptiQ, Vigilance, and TrustComms. It is also at times comes with a continuous SpO2 monitoring in case you are needing it. The advantage is obviously you have continuous cardiac output monitoring, not continuous, every 30 seconds. And at the end of the day, PAC is the catheter against which everything is compared, right? So that is the gold standard against which everything is compared. So it's all the hemodynamic parameters which are given by a PAC can be obtained by this device. And there is indicated in situations where less invasive techniques are contraindicated or fail to provide accurate cardiac output values. So which example can you give me? Can somebody think of an example where a PAC is still indicated in the current day and age? With RV failure, absolutely. RV failure is one such indication where any other device really doesn't bring up the mark. So here PAC is still indicated because RV failure is notorious. We know that once RV fails, everything else fails. The LV can fail, RV can still hold on, but once RV fails, too much fluid is bad, too less fluid is bad, everything is bad. Positive pressure ventilation is bad. So in those patients where you have to totally titrate the fluids very much, there a PA catheter is still indicated. Disadvantage, obviously it's invasive, it's costly, and all the complications that it has with PAC is still there. Now shifting from there to a minimally invasive, we have an arterial waveform analysis. So what it does is it analyzes the arterial waveform, and it says that the arterial waveform is proportionate to the stroke volume. The shape of the arterial waveform is proportionate to the stroke volume. So based on that, we can have calibrated or non-calibrated device. Calibrated devices are PICO plus, LITCO plus in the EV1000, or also called the volume view. The non-calibrated FlowTrack, Vigilio, LITCO Rapid, PRAM, NextWin, and so on. The difference between calibrated and uncalibrated is that the calibrated devices have a secondary mechanism by which they are confirming the cardiac output. So it is like validation of the cardiac output which is given by the arterial waveform. So by two means you are trying to validate the same findings. So it's probably more accurate as compared to an uncalibrated device. An uncalibrated device takes in a lot of assumptions. It's based on a lot of data, based on height, weight, age, sex and all, and then it's just assumes that this will be the compliance of the vessels and this will be the resistance factors of the vessels, and that's how it sort of makes adjustments regarding the patient, specific patient group. So obviously that's not as accurate as a calibrated device. The Doppler, we can have a TE or a TT kind of a Doppler, which is USCOM or a cardio QTM. Fixed principle, barely used, but for theoretical purpose, it is still there. Bioimpedance, bioreactance. So these are the various things: ECOM, NICOM, and BioZ. I'll be talking about it in a brief. So this is the whole range of equipment which is available to you. I mean, right from a totally invasive side, this is a minimally invasive side. A PA catheter is totally invasive. This comes under minimally invasive. This comes under less invasive, and this is totally non-invasive, CNAP and ClearSight. So arterial waveform analysis, and a lot has been already spoken about it. We know basically that it is physiologically linked to stroke volume. And by just seeing the curve, we can actually make out a lot of things. So if there is vasodilatation, what do we expect? We expect the diastolic element to be low, right? So if you have a widened pulse pressure, probably it's a vasodilated state, probably a septic state. On the other hand, in a vasoconstriction, this and this, the difference, the diastolic pressure becomes higher. So the pulse pressure is very narrow. So obviously the arterial waveform also becomes a bit more smaller as compared to this. So hypovolemic shock, you have this kind of a vasoconstricted state, you have this kind of a waveform. So the basic principle behind an arterial waveform analysis is ventricular arterial coupling. So this is, if somebody asks you what is the principle, this is one word answer: ventricular arterial coupling. What it means that the arterial pulse pressure and its contour are primarily determined by the left ventricular stroke volume and arterial impedance. So two things, stroke volume and the resistance, are the two things which determine the pulse pressure and its contour. And hence the stroke volume can be continuously estimated by analyzing the arterial pressure waveform obtained from an arterial line. These waveforms are affected by interaction between the stroke volume and individual vascular compliance with the aortic impedance and the peripheral arterial resistance. Obviously the prerequisite for any arterial analysis is a stable waveform. You cannot have a damped waveform or an underdamped waveform, a lot of ectopics. So all those things are a total no for analyzing an arterial waveform. How does it work? We know that the stroke volume is proportionate to the amplitude of the aortic pressure. Their relationship is influenced by the compliance and resistance. Aortic pressure and peripheral pressures are related to a pulse wave amplification phenomena. If you see the pressure in the aorta is, suppose say 90, 100. As you go more and more peripherally, the pressure keeps rising more and more because the vessels are becoming more and more narrow. The aorta is big, the vessels are narrow. So since the vessels become narrow, the flow velocities become much more higher. So hence there is a magnification of the pressures as we go peripherally. The mean pressure remains the same, but the systolic pressure tends to go much more higher as compared to the aortic pressure. And this pulse wave amplification depends upon the vascular resistance. Now we have several devices. We have the PICO, both calibrated and non-calibrated, which analyze the arterial waveform, and each one works in a different way. Suppose this is your classical arterial waveform. The PICO uses the systolic portion. The systolic portion is the portion before the dicrotic notch, and it subtracts out the diastolic portion and says that the systolic proportion is proportionate to the stroke volume. Multiplying stroke volume by heart rate, it gives you cardiac output. The LIDCO, it uses what's called the pulse power analysis, and your Vigilio flow track monitor, the flow track and the Vigilio uses what's called the dynamic tone technology. What it does is that it measures the same waveform almost 100 times over a 20-second period, and then it reconstructs and puts it into an algorithm and tells you that this is a stroke volume. The data for the initial flow track used to be re-updated every 20 minutes. Now it's every 1 minute. So that's how it has become more advanced. The latest software has made it more advanced, and every 1 minute the data is re-updated. Advantages is almost a continuous data of cardiac output, stroke volume and stroke volume variation. And in case it is coupled with the transpulmonary thermodilution, you can also give information about the extravascular lung volume. Disadvantage, minimally invasive, it's still minimally invasive. It still requires an arterial line inside place. And an optimal arterial pulse signal is absolutely essential. So obviously any form of arrhythmia damping or use of IVP, where the arterial waveform itself is, the contour of the waveform itself is totally distorted because of the diastolic augmentation, there you can't use this arterial waveform analysis as a surrogate for cardiac output or stroke volume. Coming to a bit detail about the PICO technology. Now, PICO technology is a combination of two techniques. One, transpulmonary thermodilution. Second, pulse contour analysis. So it's going to use the arterial waveform for measuring the stroke volume and hence the cardiac output. At the same time, it's going to validate the same by actually producing thermodilation. This thermodilation is a bit different from what thermodilation you do with a PA catheter. There, thermodilation is done with an injectate in the proximal lumen and the tip of the thermistor is lying in the pulmonary artery. Here, the detecting point is a arterial line in the femoral or the axillary or the radial, wherever it is. So it is going through the entire lungs, it is going through the entire heart, right heart, lungs, left heart, and to the artery where it is sensed. So the PICO technology uses any standard central venous line and a thermistor tipped arterial PICO catheter instead of a standard arterial line. The only thing which is different is this PulsioCath, which is specially equipped with a thermistor. So the thermistor is not at the tip of the PA, rather it's at the artery. So we inject here, we sense somewhere here. When we inject, we get this kind of waveform. From here, there are two values which are taken out. One is the mean transit time, which is the time from which half the indicator has passed the point of detection, and a downslope time where there is a rapid fall or equalization of temperature. So based on these two, which is measured by the machine, and you don't have to really measure it, it brings about a lot of parameters. And these are the parameters which it detects. The thermodilation parameters of the cardiac output, the global end-diastolic volume, the intrathoracic blood volume, the extravascular lung volume, pulmonary vascular permeability index, the global ejection fraction, and the cardiac function index. And the pulse contour parameters are the same as any other pulse contour device or any other arterial waveform device. So this is the mean transit time and this is the downslope time which I was talking about. So what happens is that once you have injected through your central line a cold saline bolus, and mind you, 3 cold saline boluses are prerequisite for any measurement so that there is no discrepancy. In case one value appears to be different from other, you can always omit that value and use the other 2. So that's why 3 values are required, and it has to be at a constant injection rate. These are 2 prerequisites for any kind of measurement. So what happens is that the intrathoracic compartment can be considered as a series of mixing chambers. Mixing chamber as in, from the right atrium injecting the cold bolus, it is going into the right ventricle. From there it is going into the lungs through the pulmonary artery. This is the largest chamber effectively because it has got the maximum surface area. Then it comes to the left atrium, then the left ventricle, and then through the aorta it is going to where it is being measured. Based on the graph which is available, the mean transit time and the downslope time which the machine calculates, you can bring about these calculations. First is the intrathoracic thermal volume. The intrathoracic thermal volume is a multiplication factor of the cardiac output and the mean transit time. How do we measure the cardiac output? The cardiac output is measured by your normal Stewart-Hamilton equation. For any injection you give and you have the area under the curve. The area under the curve corresponds to the cardiac output. That also the machine will tell you, you don't have to calculate it. So the cardiac output into the mean transit time will give you the intrathoracic thermal volume. The pulmonary thermal volume is the cardiac output into downslope time. So you have this entire component and you have this component. If you subtract these two, you are going to be seeing only what is there inside the heart, the right heart and the left heart. So that is the global end diastolic volume. That's a volume in the heart at the end of diastole. Okay, so this is the closest surrogate of your preload, because at the end of diastole, before the prior systole, that is your preload. This is the best surrogate because it gives you a global idea of both right heart and left heart, how much volume is there. The intrathoracic blood volume is 1.25 the global end diastolic volume. This obviously separates out what is inside the pulmonary vessels or the capillaries and what is outside in the form of pulmonary edema or interstitial fluid. If we subtract intrathoracic thermal volume from intrathoracic blood volume, we get what is called the extravascular lung volume or the extravascular fluid or the congestion fluid or the pulmonary edema fluid. So this is the most useful parameter which is obtained from transpulmonary thermodilution. Can this be obtained from a PA catheter? No, because it doesn't go through the lungs at all. It is just stopped right. Measured, inject here, measured in PA. Doesn't even go through the lungs. So that's the importance of this. Now, one specific parameter which was measured is the pulmonary vascular permeability index, and this is very useful to differentiate between cardiogenic or a hydrostatic pulmonary edema vis-a-vis a high permeability edema which occurs in sepsis, which occurs in ARDS, which occurs in pulmonary contusions. So this is how we differentiate. How we differentiate is that in hydrostatic edema, the extravascular lung volume as well as the pulmonary blood volume both are increased. It's after a congested state. Both are increased. So the ratio is around 2 to 2.5, up to 2 to 2.5. In case the high permeability edema, what's happening is the extravascular lung volume is increased a lot because of its permeability, but the pulmonary blood volume almost remains the same. So the ratio becomes more than 2.5 to 3. Normally it is less than 1. Up to 2.5 you can say it is hydrostatic. More than 2.5 or 3 you can say safely that is probably high permeability pulmonary edema. The global ejection fraction, we have already told you how to do it. When we subtract the pulmonary thermal volume from the intrathoracic thermal volume, we get the global end diastolic volume. And the global ejection fraction is when we can further divide it into right ventricular ejection fraction and the left ventricular ejection fraction when we divide it by the stroke volume with the right ventricular end diastolic volume or the left ventricular end diastolic volume. These are all given to you. You don't have to go into the details. It just tells you. But the most important is what is the questions that it answers. What is the current situation based on cardiac output? Is the heart pumping well or not? What is the preload? Global end diastolic volume is the surrogate for preload. Will giving volume, most important question, increase the cardiac output? Again, stroke volume variation. What is the afterload? The systemic vascular resistance. Are the lungs dry? A very important question for us. Extravascular lung volume. And these are the normal range of the values. Extravascular lung waters are 3 to 7 ml per kg. The best thing about the global end diastolic volume is that it is not affected by mechanical ventilation. So it remains the same irrespective of which phase of mechanical ventilation is it. Is it a positive pressure ventilation? Is it a spontaneous breathing? It doesn't really matter. It remains the same. And obviously extravascular lung water by itself is a very poor indicator, and it tells you that the mortality goes sky high as soon as it goes above 7. Now, such kind of a patient comes to you, community acquired pneumonia, septic shock with a low blood pressure, you're given already saline, you're giving norepinephrine, the PF ratios are totally short, 110, the PEEP is 12. Should we monitor the cardiac output at this stage? How many people agree with this? Do you think this patient requires specialized monitoring, or do you think further resuscitation is indicated before we go in for specialized monitoring? Why? Would you like to give more fluids? Yes? No? Why? Because of the PF ratios. The PF ratios are totally gone. So here giving more fluids will be very, very dangerous. But at the same time, some data can be obtained with the help of these devices, which gives you information regarding the extravascular lung water. It gives you the information regarding the cardiac output. And that's where the role of these devices, calibrated devices, come into the picture. So these are the questions which is going to answer. How much is the cardiac output? Is it adequate? Should we give fluids? How is the LV contractility? Is there any RV dysfunction? And should we not give fluids? So both the questions need to be answered. Should we give fluids? And second question, should we not give fluids? Not giving fluids will be guided by extravascular lung water. Giving fluids, global end diastolic volume, a stroke volume variation. Okay, so that's how we're going to decide. Now this is a very good slide which tells you the comparison between a PA catheter and your newer devices. Both will give you cardiac output. Is the cardiac output adequate in the form of tissue perfusion? Is it achieving? Here the surrogate is SvO2, here you can do ScVO2. Should we give fluids? It's based on PaOP. Here it is based on some dynamic tests. Every kind of fluid boluses or fluid challenge should be given with a continuous cardiac output monitoring. You agree with that? And the continuous cardiac output monitoring is possible with these kind of devices, which tells you that after doing this dynamic test, a PLR or an respiratory occlusion test, what is the change in your cardiac output? Should we not give fluids? Here again a PaOP, very rough surrogate saying that PaOP more than this much you cannot give fluid, you should not give fluid. Here you have a figure, an objective figure, which tells you that extravascular lung water is more than this, do not give fluids. Is there RV dysfunction? Now here is where the PA catheter scores over this. Increased pulmonary vascular resistance. Here it only gives you a decreased cardiac output and an increased CVP. So here this is where a pulmonary artery catheter totally scores over this device. Short of that, everything else is much more superior. So once you see there is no RV dysfunction, this device is a superior device. There is no doubt about it. In place there is an RV dysfunction, there is a toss up between PA catheter and this device. So the consensus for circulatory shock says that we suggest the use of transpulmonary thermodilation or PA catheter in severe shock, especially in case of those associated with acute respiratory distress syndrome, as somebody rightly said. But PA catheter in refractory shock and right ventricular dysfunction. So that's where this becomes a more superior device. So in case somebody asks you, is there still a role? Yes, there's still a role in this subset of patient. Now coming to uncalibrated device, the Vigilio, the FlowTrack, the Pram and the PulsioFlex. This is the most commonly used device which we are familiar with, so we will talk just about this and not about the rest. It integrates multiple characteristics of arterial pressure waveform with specific patient demographic data. No external calibration is required. That means no validation with a cardiac output. Only a standard arterial line is used, but it is connected to a special transducer. It's called the FlowTrack, and the machine is called Vigilio. So please don't confuse both with the same. The transducer is called FlowTrack. The monitor is called Vigilio. No central venous line is required. So what it does is basically it samples the standard deviation of pulse pressure over a time frame of 20 seconds, and this is correlated with normal stroke volume based on demographic data. Stroke volume is taken by the pulsatility into K, and K is a constant which quantifies the resistance and compliance. This K is estimated from a large database of vasoplegic patients and so on. Advantages obviously is no manual calibration is required. It reflects real-time change in vascular tone. Different arterial sites are acceptable. Continuous SCVO2 is available if it's used in conjunction with an appropriate oximetry equipped central venous line. So that's separate, but continuous SCVO2 is available because there's a port in the Vigilio monitor for SCVO2 monitoring. So if your central line is equipped with SCVO2, continuous SCVO2 monitoring, you can port, then you can always attach it to the Vigilio monitor. This is an add-on. It doesn't come as a part and parcel of your FlowTrack. It's a part of the monitor. Disadvantages: arterial waveform is important, and a good signal is important for cardiac output calculation. So still not very reliable during arrhythmias, but they have worked upon the software. Initially it used to be like within a 20-second time frame, if they are more than 10 or 12 in case in atrial fibrillation or ectopics, then you can't probably use it. Now they have brought it down to 6 to 8. So they have managed to bring it down to this much. So in that 20-second time frame, if there are less than 6 to 8 ectopics, you can still use it. But still, it is a device which should not be used in the ICU. Why? Because there's so much shifts. It is not calibrated or externally validated by any other thing. So for that reason, this may not be the greatest device. It is used under steady state conditions, like in the operation theatre, in the perioperative period, where you predict a specific course to occur. There it is still okay. But in an ICU setup, we will be skeptical using this. Intra-aortic balloon pump use, obviously you can't use it, and ventricular assist device, no. The third generation FlowTrack Vigilio does not reliably track changes in cardiac output induced by norepinephrine in critically ill patients. So almost all our patients in shock are on norepinephrine, so it does not reliably track. So the error rate percentage is almost 61%. So probably not the greatest thing to use. This is in a brief regarding a comparison between a Pico Plus and a FlowTrack. Now let's go further because it's a lot to cover. And esophageal Doppler. Now esophageal Doppler is basically a kind of a catheter which is put inside, which is rests in the lower end of the esophagus, and it is equipped with a Doppler assisted technology. The USCOM is one such example. So what it does is it measures the flow in the descending thoracic aorta, the velocity of flow in descending thoracic aorta in a semi-continuous kind of a manner, and it gives you the velocity of flow. From the velocity of flow, you know, by those who do echo, by doing velocity and cross-sectional area, you can actually find out the stroke volume. From there, the cardiac output. What it presumes is that a constant proportion of the blood goes into a descending aorta and some proportion goes into the upper part of the circulation. And this is a presumption that the cephalic and caudal distribution remains static throughout all conditions. But this, you know that this doesn't occur all the time, because there can be a redistribution. Peripheral vasoconstriction can also change the entire picture. The size of the aorta, which is considered to be constant, may also change in stages of vasodilatation. So all these things are there, which are shortcomings of this device. So they may not be absolutely accurate, but they correlate well with cardiac output measured by thermodilation. So this is the kind of waveform which you get for normovolemia. When you have an increased afterload, the peak becomes much lesser because it is flowing against more resistance. Decreased afterload, it becomes much more taller. Ventricular failure, the entire peak is blunted. Hypovolemia, again very sharp peaks and a narrower waveform. Advantages: easy placement, minimal training, only 12 cases required. You just have to put it blindly and make sure the position is okay. Provides continuous real-time monitoring, low incidence of iatrogenic complications, minimal infective risk. Disadvantage: high cost, poor tolerance in awake patients. So obviously its use is limited only to intubated patients. Probe displacement can occur during prolonged monitoring on whenever the patient is turning. And high inter-observer variability when you measure changes in regard to fluid challenges. Why? Because we are dealing with hypovolemia to normal volemia. Now this is just a change in the size rather than a change in the contour. So there it becomes an inter-observer variability. Partial carbon dioxide rebreathing, fixed principle, not a great fan of this. I don't think anybody uses this. It's more for theoretical value, so we can just safely skip through it. Nobody's going to ask me. Electrical bioimpedance and bioreactors. So now this is something which is still used in certain centers. And again, just like any other non-calibrated device, it's nothing related to calibration, it's totally different technology, but it is not very accurate, at least in critical care settings. Its use was very much used in cardiac surgeries because there were predictable swings in fluid shifts. It is based on change in the resistance to electric currents because of change in the fluid component within the thorax. So in every stage of your cardiac cycle, the thoracic volume of the fluid component increases during diastole, decreases during systole. This is how it's happening because of the pumping. So that's what causes changes in the electric current, and that is electrical bioimpedance. Now there's one more concept, bioreactance. You must have heard. Anybody knows the difference? The difference is same as AM and FM. AM is amplitude modulation, for those I read it for the first time today, and FM is frequency modulation. So what it does is, FM is superior to AM. Why? It cancels out the extra noise. Similarly, bioreactance is what detects the phase change of these electrical currents. So it's relatively superior to bioimpedance. Ultimately, they both are based on electrical current only, changes in the thoracic volume of the fluid component, but that depends on a phase change. This depends on the volume change. So the amplitude changes are detected by a bioimpedance, the phase changes are detected by bioreactance. This is enough to impress any examiner. You don't need more than that. Okay, so constant electrical stimulation induced by vascular blood flow. So low grade current is given and impedance to current waveform produced. This is what is calculated. Advantage non-invasive, disadvantage reliability in critically ill patient, not very clear. Not very clear. Now a totally non-invasive device is in the market now. These were all minimally invasive because there was still something attached. So they're totally non-invasive. It's a finger cuff. It's called the volume clamp devices. The two names are ClearSight and CNAP. Or the next, so ClearSight, CNAP, NextPin. What they do is, this is basically a finger cuff. You can see there's a cuff in the finger, and there is a radial artery applanation tonometer, a device which is lying on top of the radial artery. So what it does is this cuff inflates and deflates in such a way that the digital arteries are constantly kept open. So at the same time, from this radial artery, it is measuring the arterial waveform. It is just sensing the arterial waveform by the changes in the size of the radial artery. And this cuff is attached to this and is trying to keep the small digital arteries always open. So based on that, the difference between this and this, it is trying to make out the stroke volume. I am not quite understanding how it does that, but it does that. No, it does, supposedly it does well also. Why? Because two techniques, photoplethysmography measures the diameter of the finger arteries, and the pulse control analysis measures the cardiac output. How accurate they are? Well, under patients who are not on vasopressors, pretty accurate actually. They correlate very well with your arterial waveform also. But those under vasopressors, the error proportion is almost 50%. So 50% yes, 50% no. The best thing is that this is not affected by arrhythmias. Unlike all other arterial contour waveform analysis, is not affected by arrhythmias. It's just on artery size. It is not related to the contour at all. So this is not affected by that. So this somehow negates that arterial waveform contour as a problem. So even in AF it can be used pretty reliably. But the problem in ICU patient under vasopressor, again, it's a problem. It may not be accurate. So the final take home point is that in perioperative monitoring, only patients who are high risk surgical should be actually going in for any kind of invasive monitoring. If there is no changes in vascular resistance expected, then any of these device, a finger, clamp or flow track which you can do. But in case there is major changes in vascular resistance, then obviously you should go in for an calibrated device or an esophageal doubler. In ICU monitoring, those who are on vasopressor, no doubt, it all comes down to calibrated device. So at the end of the day, it is the calibrated device which is be the go-to device in case of circulatory failure in ICU. Especially when propounded by ARDS and right heart issues. In those cases, this is where it is used. Conclusion, early detection of patient condition, reasonably good results and less invasive, but always correlate with the clinical picture to get the best outcome. And finally, no device is going to improve outcome unless there is a treatment plan along with it. So all devices have to be taken with a pinch of salt and has to correlate with the clinical picture. Thank you.